Welcome to our last lecture, probably our longest little video from week 2. So, let me see. Am I in the right spot? Sorry. Yes, I'm in the right spot. Okay, so this is really where the textbook starts for this week. The other stuff is kind of background and things that are important to know as we proceed into the substantive law for environmental law. But this is where the textbook starts. Anyway, they start talking about administrative agencies in environmental law. And environmental law is one of those practices where administrative rulings, administrative laws are super, super duper important. Okay, so the textbook talks about delegation and regulation that we have to really be concerned with vis-a-vis agencies and administrative law. Okay, so our Constitution, supreme law of the land in the United States, we created 3 branches: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. So each of those branches can give away some of its power, delegate some of its power to either to make their own rules or laws. Okay, and they can delegate this power to an administrative agency. So the administrative agency then has power to do things like make rules and regulations, conduct investigations, make decisions, right? Kind of quasi judicial decisions, adjudicatory decisions, and if someone is not following the rules and regs, they can penalize that noncompliance. Okay, so these are kinds of the roles and functions of any administrative agency: rules and regs, investigate, adjudication, penalty. The trick on this is they can never exceed the authority from what we call the enabling act, an enabling statute. Whatever statute gives them the authority, the power, they can't exceed the power that came from the statute. Okay, so if we're talking about the Clean Air Act, the Clean Air Act gives the EPA certain powers. If the EPA exceeds the powers from the Clean Air Act, then you can go to the courts and strike down the action of the agency. So that, is has kind of been a big issue when we start talking about climate change, that, the EPA hasn't had the power to regulate greenhouse gases. Or maybe hasn't opted to. But anyways, we'll talk about that later. But so you can't exceed the power. So if your power is granted by Congress, you can't exceed that. So that's like a lot of times you get a lawsuit that they exceeded the power under the Enabling Act. Sometimes, or they didn't follow the process of the Enabling Act, right? Be it the Administrative Procedure Act, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, whatever, the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, all of that. So they get their authority, they get their power, and one of the things that they can do, right? We just talked about this, is making rules and regs. So to implement this broad legislation, agencies establish detailed regs and rules. So they're like, okay, we're in charge of controlling air pollution, or the EPA. We are going to set particulate limits for emissions from, say, automobiles. Like, you can't emit lead anymore. Holy cow, well, that's a big deal, because we used to have cars that ran on lead-based fuel. Well, that's why we don't have cars that run on lead-based fuel anymore, because the EPA made rules restricting emissions of lead into the air, and the auto manufacturers had to adjust the cars. They were kind of grandfathered in, and now you really can't have a lead burning a car with lead-based fuel. So they make these rules and regs. Okay, so rules and regs aren't just like, hey, Mary, you can't do this. Hey, Joe, you can't do this. It's for a large group and directed at what they are doing, continually, right? It's not like, oh, you did this 10 years ago, that's bad. So after rules and regs are enacted or implemented or approved, they are compiled in a federal publication called the Code of Federal Regulations. The Code of Federal Regulations has different topics. We call them titles. And after they are compiled, that they're approved, they're assigned a citation in the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, the daily agency activities are published in what we call the Federal Register. So that's just a publication. Again, at that remember we were at that GPO website last week. So you go to the GPO and you see everything that every federal agency did on that particular date. Maybe they proposed some rules. Maybe they finalized some rules. Maybe they made some commentary, did some investigation. Maybe there was a new director or something like that. Anything they did is published in the Federal Register. So if we are looking for proposed rules, we are going to go to the Federal Register. Okay, so there's a couple of different kinds of rules. We have substantive rules. Okay, so that's like, okay, your emissions cannot exceed a certain amount of particulate matter for your car. Okay, so that's we're following the directives of the Clean Air Act, and our impact is outside the agency, right? In the country at large. Okay, a procedural rule where the agency says, okay, this is how we are going to come up with, I don't know, this is how we are going to investigate a claim or something like that. They come up with a process of how they operate. And then an interpretive rule is kind of a guidance statement. This is, this is what we want to do, and this is what we're going to do, and this is why. So just guidance, but not it's more of a, hey, this is why we're doing this, or this is what we, our policy or our purpose, things going on like that. So substantive, this is on the quiz, so remember this: substantive, procedural, interpretive. Those are the three kinds of rules. So any agency that wants to propose and enact or promulgate a rule or a reg has to follow the procedures in a law called the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA. And we talked about that with, I think, the Sierra Club versus Morton. I think it was the Sierra Club versus Morton case that they didn't follow. Yeah, that was the one. They didn't follow the procedures in the Administrative Procedures Act. The other one was the Federal Power Commission. Okay, so here is this is very nice. I have the links in the slide above in case you want to go there yourself and see it live. But this is a screenshot from the EPA website. EPA website has a tab for laws and regulations. They don't give you the full text. You can link out to it, but they give you summaries of relevant statutes and regulations. Okay, so the APA has processes by which agencies develop and issue regulations. So the first thing that you have to do is when your agency people come together, you're like, we ought to have a rule. We need a rule. They come up with a draft rule. Okay, they publish a notice of a proposed regulation. Then there is a certain amount of time for the public to comment on the proposed rule. And then so then the agency has to read every comment, take them into account, and come up with a final rule, taking into account these comments. They can disregard the comments if they're crazy and cuckoo and not based in science or something like that, but they have to read them. They don't have to respond to them, but they have to read them. So that is just the summary in the APA. And this is actually the text of it from the Cornell site. Okay, so general notice of proposed rulemaking goes in the Federal Register, which tells you, time, place, and nature, what statute it's under, and the substance of the proposed rule. It does not apply to interpretive rules, right? Remember we were talking about interpretive rules where it's just kind of guidance statements, so it doesn't apply to that because that's just them talking. And then everybody has an opportunity through written views, no oral views. You can't just say like, it's not like there's a public meeting where you get to chat. It's a written rule. And then, anyway, then they come up with their final rule and then they publish that in the Federal Register and then it ends up going into the CFR when it's assigned a number. So let me actually, well, maybe we might take a break here. I want to show you, this is in your discussion group assignment. So I'm going to show you this and then maybe I'm actually going to stop this video, and even though I promised this was the last one, this will be shorter and we'll go on to the next one. But so if we go to regulations.gov, we can find proposed regulations by all federal agencies currently. Okay, so here's our regulations. These are comments due soon, posted recently. So what you're going to do is search through regulations. So let's see if there's anything due today. And from here, you can actually like change the dates. I think your discussion board, I want you to look through the last 30 days. And you can see nothing today is the EPA, but let's say if I did, let's do the last 15 days. And then I find the Environmental Protection Agency. There are, what did I have? 43 postings. Okay. So I want you to then X out everything but the proposed rules. And I want you to look through those, find one that interests you, and follow what's in the discussion board. I think it's like summarize it, tell me whether you're for it or against it. And then after your classmates start posting, you can respond to their discussion board. So why don't you do that now? At least just practice it while it's still in your head. Maybe find the proposed rule. In the real world, this is where you would type your comment, or you could attach something longer, like a file. So that is my little mini assignment for you right now. Okay, so I'm going to stop this and I'll start up the lecture in another video.